and welcome to a special New Year's edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I am your host, Catherine Hadro, in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us as we kick off 2020. In this week's show, we look back at some of the top pro-life stories of 2019 and what that might mean for 2020. From Secretary Pompeo's expanded pro-life policy abroad to a wave of pro-life laws in the U.S. and the Supreme Court taking up an abortion-related case, the stage is set for 2020 to be a battle year. But before we dive in, we first want to remind you about a unique component of this show, our weekly call to action. Every week, we provide the most important way you can make a difference from home to advance the pro-life cause. All you need to do to follow the call to action is go to prolifeweekly.com. One week, the call to action may be signing a necessary petition. Other weeks, it may be sending a message directly to your lawmaker. It depends on what the pro-life movement specifically needs that week. Again, to follow the call to action, just go to prolifeweekly.com. In early 2019, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced action the Trump administration was taking to strengthen and implement a global pro-life policy. 1 week after the announcement, we joined Secretary Pompeo at the State Department. Here's part of our interview. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, thanks for being with us this morning.
It's great to be with you.
You made a big announcement last week about more strictly enforcing the expanded Mexico City policy. Can you tell us, why is this policy important and why now?
So, Catherine, President Trump has made clear that protecting the life of the unborn is an important part of what this administration is working to do. One of the places that there's risk is that American taxpayer dollars, money that comes from you and from me, will be used by foreign non-governmental organizations in a way that supports abortion or abortion-related services. We want to do everything we can to make sure that that does not happen. And so what we announced was a way to prevent there being backdoor from loopholes from subcontracting in a way that would present the risk that there would be one more child that didn't come to life.
And the second part of your announcement concerned fully enforcing the Silgender Amendment, which prohibits U.S. funds from being used to lobby for or against abortion. Can you clarify, is this the first time this law is being fully enforced? And where have you seen abuses of this law?
So this is a substantial step. We want to make sure that in everything we do, in the way we contract, in the way we communicate, every organization to which United States taxpayers provide funds understands their obligation, their duty to ensure that there's not the promotion of abortion anywhere in the world. And the Silgender Amendment has been on the books for a long time. This administration is determined to ensure that it is fully enforced.
And how are you planning to fully enforce the Silgender Amendment abroad?
So there'll be lots of ways. First, it's to communicate. Just as with any enforcement mechanism, when organizations understand their obligations, most of them will comply. They'll want to do so selfishly because they want to continue to receive those resources, but they want to do things right, so we have to communicate the requirements that they have. The second thing is where we find an organization that's not behaving appropriately, acting in a way that is inconsistent with what they've committed to, that is, they'll have a contractual obligation, we'll pull that money.
Planned Parenthood has called the Global Protect Life policy the global gag rule. Can you clarify, Mr. Secretary, does this pro-life policy censor doctors abroad, as abortion advocates claim?
Not at all. We know the First Amendment here in the United States. We're doing nothing to deny anyone the ability to speak about a subject that they deem important, indeed, even if they disagree with this administration's views. What we're simply saying is that the American policy is going to push back. We're going to do our level best to ensure that the least amongst us, the unborn, aren't, with U.S. taxpayer dollars, aborted.
And what role does the State Department play in upholding a pro-life agenda abroad and upholding the sanctity of life?
So the Mexico City policy that was originally put in place by President Reagan, now several decades back, President Trump has expanded upon. And the State Department has a real role in that. You see that in the announcement that we made. Our team around the world, the resources that Congress provides, that with monies that come from the American taxpayers, we have an obligation to ensure that it's spent in a way that is consistent with President Trump's objectives.
We are more than halfway through President Donald Trump's first term. You've been Secretary of State for less than a year, almost 1 year. How much time has had to be spent simply undoing 8 years' worth of abortion extremism put into place from the Obama administration?
So we did flip the switch. There's no doubt. President Trump's policies are very different than the previous administration. Some of that work here at the State Department was done before my time, when the administration first came into office under the guidance of the Vice President and the President. But there's still more work to do. I've spent a fair amount of time on it. I'll continue to ensure that we're executing President Trump's vision with respect to making sure that no money that comes through the State Department is used to underwrite abortion or abortion-related services.
Thank you to Secretary Pompeo for taking the time to speak with us. 2019 brought with it a wave of pro-life laws and hysteria from the abortion movement in response. America's abortion debate probably hit fever pitch when Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed the Human Life Protection Act into law in May, banning near all abortions in the state. Following the major news, we got reaction from Bishop Robert Baker of Birmingham, Alabama, who joined us from our EWTN headquarters in Irondale, Alabama. Here's part of our conversation. This new pro-life law is putting Alabama in the nation's spotlight right now. First off, what is your reaction to the Human Life Protection Act becoming law?
I think it's a great step forward for the pro-life movement throughout the country and world. I'm happy to see the people of Alabama generally supporting this. While there's a lot of opposition shown publicly through the media, I believe the majority of people of Alabama support what happened on May 15th, and then that law being signed by Governor Ivey. And I personally endorse the law 100%.
The Human Life Protection Act does not include exceptions for rape and incest. There is debate over this, and we're seeing even from people who identify as pro-life, including the President of the United States, say they do not support a pro-life bill if it does not include exceptions. But Your Excellency, can you clarify, where does the Catholic Church stand on this and the issue of exceptions?
Well, doesn't it make sense that once one acknowledges that life begins at conception, that really there are no exceptions to that reality that that is a human life? So up to now, politicians have somewhat compromised on the issue of rape and incest. I laud the Alabama legislators for raising the issue. Why? Because that still is an infant in the womb. So obviously, if you acknowledge life, then you'll support omitting that protection that has been in most laws throughout our country. So it seems extreme, but if you really look at it carefully, it's a very logical conclusion, and one that, of course, is controversial because up to now, nobody but Alabama has done this. So I stand behind the decision and the arguments in favor of not making exceptions for rape or incest.
From what you've seen in the media coverage surrounding this bill, what has been, in your opinion, the most egregious instance of misinformation? Well,
I think people are occasionally misrepresenting this law. They don't even use the title Human Life Protection Act because that's exactly what it is. So they'll just refer to HB 314. And they also will sometimes just make a vague reference to the criminalizing of the act, referring to it as Class A, Class C felony, Class A for those who perpetrate the act, Class C for those who attempt it, failing to say the punishment only goes to the physician who performs or attempts to perform the act, not the woman or the parents involved.
That's an important clarification. Thank you. Thank you to His Excellency for that interview. It was in January of 2019 that Virginia Governor Ralph Northam made comments on a radio show that sounded like a defense of infanticide. In the weeks that followed, we broke the news that President Donald Trump held a meeting at the White House with an abortion attempt survivor and other pro-lifers who beat the odds just by being born. We got an exclusive interview with Melissa Ohden, the abortion attempt survivor, right after her meeting with President Trump.
Melissa, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
For our viewers who are not familiar with your story, can you tell us a little bit about your witness?
I'm the survivor of a failed abortion. It was 41 years ago that my biological mother, as a college student, had a saline infusion abortion forced upon her against her will. That type of procedure was the most common one back in the 1970s, but it involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding the preborn baby in the womb. The intent of that toxic salt solution was to poison and scald the child to death. And usually the procedure lasted about 72 hours. The child would soak in that toxic salt solution, and after their life was successfully ended by it, then premature labor was induced with the intent of that deceased child being delivered. In my circumstances, we know I actually soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days, just because they couldn't successfully induce her labor until that 5th day. And so on the 5th day of that abortion procedure, I was delivered at St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, believing that I would be a successful abortion. And lo and behold, I was accidentally born alive.
Wow, and here you are today.
And here I am,
and
right?
Here you are, and you are such a bold witness. So tell us about being at the meeting with President Trump. What was that like? What did you get to say to him?
It was absolutely surreal, right? I described it as someone else of like, you have one of those moments where you're going, I was meant to be here today, right? This is what I was called to do. And so sitting in that Oval Office with him and hearing him talk so passionately about his commitment to life and what he's willing to keep doing legislatively to protect lives like mine. It's absolutely surreal. I am just so thankful for him and this administration and the bold moves he continues to make so that lives like mine can be protected in our society.
What is your impression of what President Trump thinks of this extreme abortion legislation we're continuing to see across the nation?
Oh, you can tell he thinks it's just an abomination, right? He talked a lot about Governor Northam and his comments in Virginia, about some of the other states making these same aggressive moves against life. And really, I appreciate that he made it a battle cry, right? That this is a movement. He kept using the word movement, and I love that so much. He said, he said, I think there's more that's been happening in terms of movement in the last couple of weeks than we've seen in a long time. And it's because people see what is happening and they're not willing to, sit by quietly or remain silent. And so he was just such a great encouragement for all of us to be moving in our own communities to stand up in defense of life.
Wow. Finally, Melissa, as so much of this extreme abortion legislation is in the news, from Governor Cuomo signing that bill into law to Governor Northam's comments, what do you see as your role today? I mean, you just met with the President of the United States.
That sounds so funny to hear come out of some. You've met with the President of the United States. What next? You know what? I feel like I'm going to keep following God wherever he leads me, right? If that means that I keep coming back to Washington and, standing up for legislative bills that will make a difference, I will do that. If it means that I am still out in the trenches, of course, helping pregnancy centers and other organizations educate and raise funds to serve people in their communities. But I just know that I think survivors are a huge part of this conversation that needs to take place, whether it's Washington or some other community, these lives like mine that exist that have been impacted by abortion need to be heard.
When we come back,
Hi, my name is Jack and I am age 9.
we introduce you to a young pro-life New Yorker who had a prayerful response to an extreme abortion agenda. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly's New Year's Special continues after this break. Welcome back to a New Year's special edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm your host, Catherine Hadro. We saw the first rounds of Democratic presidential debates in 2019 as the Democratic Party prepares to select their nominee ahead of the 2020 election. In some of those debates, there was never even a mention of the word abortion. But in the first Democratic presidential debate, which aired on NBC News, it seemed each candidate wanted to outdo each other in abortion extremism. Here is part of our coverage and analysis with National Review's Ramesh Ponnuru and Susan B. Anthony List's Sue Swayze Liebel. Thank you both for joining us. Let's delve right into this. I want to take a listen to an exchange in the debate when moderator Lester Holt asked Senator Elizabeth Warren whether or not she would put limits on abortion. Here's how the senator responded.
Senator Warren, would you put limits on any limits on abortion?
I would make certain that every woman has access to the full range of reproductive health care services, and that includes birth control, it includes abortion, it includes everything for a woman.
Warren dodged the question, but how important is this question on limits to abortion in this campaign, Ramesh?
Well, I think we have seen that it's extraordinarily important to Democrats that their candidate be 100% committed to the abortion lobby's political positions. That's why Joe Biden flipped on taxpayer funding of abortion. He had a career-long record of opposing it, but he decided that in order to get the nomination this time around, he had to support it. And all of the other Democratic candidates on that stage are with him, and that's why none of them is going to say that there should be any limits whatsoever on abortion or its subsidization.
Sue, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's critical that her non-answer was the answer. Americans, though, are overwhelmingly opposed to late-term abortion. Less than 1 in 5 approve of a late-term abortion after the point where the baby can feel pain, which is when scientific evidence says the baby can feel pain. But it's pretty apparent that all of the Democrats running for president are extreme on the abortion issue, not just Senator Warren. President Trump made a very clear contrast on this issue. He even supported legislation in Congress that would protect babies who could feel pain at late-term abortions, which is what, of course, the majority of Americans do. So I think that the contrast couldn't be more clear.
One candidate took the abortion issue to a new extreme. Here's Democratic presidential candidate Julian Castro.
I don't believe only in reproductive freedom. I believe in reproductive justice. And what that means is that just because a woman, or let's also not forget someone in the trans community, a trans female, is poor, doesn't mean they shouldn't have the right to exercise that right to choose.
Ramesh, what does Castro's answer on abortion reveal about the Democratic Party's views on abortion today?
Well, I think what it reveals is just how thoughtless and lockstep the Democratic Party now is on this issue. What Castro was saying was there is no abortion lobby buzzword or cause that he will not jump to embrace, even if it involves him in absurdity, like suggesting that people who can't biologically even become pregnant should have a right to abortion.
And to think that was just from the first debate alone, in 2020, we are going to be tracking all abortion politics that gets wrapped up in the presidential election. Looking back at 2019, the year began on a dark note when New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed an extreme abortion bill into law. We got reaction from Albany's Bishop Edward Schorfenberger, and we also spoke with a much younger New York Catholic for his response. It's a response that's inspiring and a reminder that sometimes it's the youngest among us who can be the greatest leaders.
Congratulations,
After New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the Extreme Reproductive Health Act into law earlier this year, he celebrated. He lit the World Trade Center in pink light, a crude contrast to the dark law which now permits abortion up until the moment of birth in the state. Pro-lifers have pushed back. This past weekend, thousands gathered in Times Square for the Alive from New York event. Where the large crowd got to hear a baby's live heartbeat from Abby Johnson's own ultrasound. Also in the Empire State, another younger New Yorker is bringing more pro-life hope, but in a smaller size.
Hi, my name is Jack and I am age 9. I'm praying for Governor Cuomo. Now, the reason I'm praying for Governor Cuomo is because of the bill he passed, which you all know of.
9-year-old Jack Timmons of Central New York recently founded ConvertCuomo.com. It's a website where you can pledge to pray for Governor Cuomo, that he may have a conversion of heart and protect all life, especially life in the womb. Governor Cuomo identifies as Catholic, often invoking Pope Francis, but his fellow New York Catholic, Jack, is quick to call out the politician for this abortion law.
The day the bill passed, the next morning my wife explained at the breakfast table what had happened, and he I think was just kind of fired up, and he just said, we need to do something about this. And she actually recorded him walking around the house thinking of ideas. Maybe we could do this, maybe we could do this.
Maybe you can start off by being holy, by saying the Holy Face Chaplet, and I can send, I might send my Holy Face Chaplet thing to him.
That's a nice idea.
Jack's original idea was less high-tech. He thought every New York Catholic church could have a prayer box for Governor Cuomo's conversion. The Catholic boy wrote a letter explaining his idea to Cardinal Timothy Dolan and the Franciscan friars of the renewal. The friars then suggested to Jack he should start a website instead, which is when Jack turned to his dad for help.
Even then, he had to remind me a few times to build it. It wasn't on the top priority for me at the time, but I thought, well, knock and you shall receive. So he just kept reminding me, and I said, well, let's do this. Let's build this website. And I think we probably thought, Jack, that we would get maybe 100 people responding, a few family and friends. We had no idea. Yeah, we had no idea that we'd have over 1,000 already, and it seems to be growing.
The concept is simple. Prayer is powerful, something this little boy has already learned in his few years.
It's such a beautiful idea because it's all about prayer. Jack, why do you think prayer is so important?
Prayer is important because prayer saved my life. Prayer saved my life because when I was born, I had a hard time breathing, so I had to be brought to another hospital and hooked up to a breathing machine. While I was being driven there, my mom and dad told a lot of people, and they told their friends, and their friends told their friends, and so there were hundreds of people praying for me, and prayer works.
And the prayers have been pouring in.
What kind of responses have you gotten back? Have people been sending in their messages?
Yeah, everybody's been sending in their messages. My dad prints them out and puts them in a big box so I can read them. Would you like to hear some of them?
I would love that.
This person said, Dear Jesus, please open the governor's heart to accept, protect, and defend the gift of human life. Help him to know how much you love him. This person said, we will pray and fast for his conversion and that he sees the truth behind what he signed into law. We pray for his forgiveness, and we pray that he becomes a voice for the unborn and defender of defenselessness. We will be praying rosaries and be doing 3-day water fast.
Those are just two of the more than 1,000 prayers that have been pledged on the Convert Cuomo website in just about 3 weeks' time. The Timmons reached 1,000 prayers by Divine Mercy Sunday, are aiming for 2,000 by Ascension Thursday, and have another goal to mark 9 months since the abortion law was signed.
Our hope is that we can get as many parishes and priests offering holy masses on Sunday, September 22nd, for the conversion of pro-abortion politicians such as Governor Cuomo.
It's a beautiful goal and a reminder that sometimes the greatest inspiration to save the youngest lives can come from the young among us. After our story aired, the Convert Cuomo team exceeded their prayer goal with over 2,300 prayer commitments made for Governor Cuomo. That is a prayerful response to our culture of death. And that does it for this special New Year's edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. We at EWTN Pro-Life Weekly know that 2020 is going to be an intense battle for the pro-life movement, from the presidential election to Supreme Court rulings, but we're prepared and we're honored to monitor and cover it all from a Catholic perspective. We're in this together. So until next time, be sure to reach us at ProLifeWeekly@EWTN.com or connect with us on social media. Just search for EWTN Pro-Life on all the major platforms. And remember, Life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.